Reconvene the Board of Supervisors meeting. First item on the agenda this after 7:30 is the public comment period. If there's anyone in the audience that would like to address the board on any issue at all, unless it is a public hearing, please come forward and state your name and your voting district, please.
My name is Melinda Norman, and Port Royal is my voting district. And I'm here tonight to speak on the Guinea-Charlesburg sub-area. Unlike some of the previous speakers that have addressed the board on the issue of the Guinea area that is being proposed, I am not a newcomer that has come here for the peace and quiet and rural life of Caroline. I have lived here all my life, as well as 5 generations before me. And I don't like what I see happening in my district. This is exactly what has taken place in Spotsylvania. Supervisors had zoning changes done before anyone knew what was going on. And when the developers came in, they were ready to go and were ready for them. Except in Spotsylvania, the developers were the supervisors. I don't like the fact that a small group of people feel that it is appropriate to reclassify nearly 25,000 acres of land with very little, if any, input from the rest of the taxpayers that this will impact. I would like to know why the taxpayers of Ladysmith and Carmel Church were surveyed for their opinions as to how they wanted that area to grow, but another area of the county is not afforded that same courtesy. When Ladysmith and Carmel Church are already designated to be growth areas. I have also to wonder why, given these economic times, this is being addressed now when there are industrial and business sites in the county that the county has spent years developing with infrastructure and water and sewage that have the potential for growth for many years to come, that are close to I-95, and also at Milford, where there are many empty sites, and that even has rail access. I see this as an especially troubling issue, given the state of the economy of the county, with the rate of foreclosures and the county even furloughing its own employees. This county is borrowing millions of dollars at a time just to keep up with what is needed to be done. Where is the money coming from for what has already been done for this with maps and studies and the like? And what about water? A very big issue. Where would that come from? And the money for the roads? And what about the tourism issue? We have just recently finished our new visitor center at Carmel Church. But the most visited site, that of Jackson's Shrine at Guinea, is this, if this plan is enacted, will be sitting right in the middle of land zoned for heavy industry. Won't that look good for the visiting public? Maybe we can get a Walmart beside or in front of it. Think about that as we dole out taxpayer dollars to satisfy my supervisor's agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Norman. Appreciate you. Is there anyone else who would like to address the board on any issue at all not pertaining to a public hearing to be held later? If so, please come forward and state your name and your voting district. Is there anyone else who would like to come and address the board on any issue at all not pertaining to a public hearing? Seeing no further movement and no other comments, public comment period is closed. Thank you. The next item is public hearings, and the first public hearing this evening is TXT 01-2009, an ordinance to amend the zoning ordinance of Caroline County by amending Article 10, M1 Industrial District, Section 3, uses permitted by special exception, by adding paragraph 20, guest quarters. The purpose of this text amendment is to allow guest quarters in the M1 zoning district. Mr. Fincham? One hearing. Okay, I'm being told by the county attorney that we can have one hearing, 2 votes, separate votes, and the second public hearing will be, public comments will be at the same time. There's an ordinance to amend the zoning ordinance of Caroline County by amending Article 2, Definitions, Section 2, by adding the following definition, guest quarters, and that would be TXT 02-009. Mr. Fincham.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the proposed 2 text amendments before you this evening would allow the creation of a use for guest quarters in the M1 industrial district that is specific to certain industrial uses within those districts. The board previously had several discussions on these proposed text amendments and directed staff to forward these for public hearing, which is the subject of the 2 public hearings tonight. The first text amendment would create a definition of the guest quarters to be allowed in the M1 district. And the second text amendment would specifically allow that as a special exception use in the M1 district, subject to standards. Based upon comments that were addressed to staff at the previous meetings, staff has suggested some alternatives or some modifications for the board to consider during your deliberations on these proposed amendments. 2 of those modifications relate to the amendment of the definition of guest quarters, which would limit the number of, reduce the number of nights in which an individual could occupy the structure, as well as tie the facility to the headquarters, office headquarters of such an industry here in the United States or the Commonwealth of Virginia. The other 2 items for the board's consideration would be during the time of consideration of a special exception permit, there are certain conditions that the board could specifically place on a special use permit. One would be a condition requiring the periodic review by the Board of Supervisors. In situations where the board is concerned about compliance, historically the board has placed a condition either requiring a review or a renewal by the Board of Supervisors. A second possible condition would be one that requires the submission of an annual report on the use and occupancy of such a facility to our office, which could be incorporated in conjunction with a review by the board. The board had raised a number of issues concerning the monitoring of occupancy and issues along those lines, and the suggested conditions and or modifications to the definition were an attempt by staff to address some of the concerns that we heard expressed to us during those discussions. With that, I'll answer any questions that the board may have.
Board members have any questions, Mr. Fincham? Mr. Thomas?
Mr. Fincham, you just, excuse me, you just recently explained to me that this particular property, or I guess we're talking text amendments, so it wouldn't refer to any particular property, but the, I guess the landowner who was the genesis of this text amendment could actually at his property put up a house that could conceivably be guest quarters, because he could make it a rental house and then rent it out as much as he wanted to.
Within the confines, the short answer is generally yes. Within the current zoning ordinance, you can have a single-family dwelling on property in the county, R1, rural preservation, and the board has adopted standards limiting the occupancy of single-family dwellings to non-family members.
Right.
About 2 years ago. Even under those parameters, there are provisions where a single-family dwelling of 2, 3, 4, or 5 bedrooms, subject to size limitations, subject to health department permitting and building code standards. In theory, it is possible that a single-family dwelling could be constructed and be occupied by a certain number of non-family members,
Right.
and would not violate the zoning ordinance. So yes, I think that possibility does exist under the current ordinance.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Other questions, Mr. Fincham? Thank you, Mr. Fincham. Public hearing will be declared open on TXT 01-209 and TXT 02-209. Is there anyone who would like to speak in favor of or in opposition to these text amendments? Is there anyone who would like to speak in favor of or in opposition to these two text amendments? One last call. Is there anyone who would like to speak in favor of or in opposition to these two text amendments? Hearing no comment, public hearing is closed. Board have questions of Mr. Fincham or comments? My major concern is the fact that, and I've not, this is not the first time I've said it, is the fact that it's twofold. Number one, I am concerned about the fact that a facility such as this, being open, could turn into something more than just what it was intended for. Now, I understand from the gentleman that came before this board and was the genesis for this particular text amendment, that his issue was that he deals with foreign countries a lot in his line of work, either buying or selling his material or buying his material, and that is a common practice in those particular countries, that you have guest houses for people to stay in while they're doing business with you. And I understand that, but I still have a concern with the fact that these could turn into something more than what we have intended for them to turn into, number one. And secondly, it may not be such a big deal for where he is located, because he's located. Can we find some money in the budget to do something with the sound system? Mr. Seeley, is there any out there we can use?
I think we're out of luck, Mr. Chairman. We're going to have to make do with
all right,
what we've got.
because this is really getting on my nerves, and I think all of the board members' nerves. But the other issue has to do with the precedent that we're setting in other areas. For instance, in Ladysmith, if we pass this text amendment, then the people that own the VSE could very well ask to do the same thing. Now, where this location is at, it is on Bull Church Road, which is out of the hub of what goes on in that particular area. It may not be so bad, even if it did become something other than what it was originally intended to be. But I am concerned about what will happen down the road and what will happen in areas that will not be as conducive to this type of operation. And I know what Mr. Thomas has said and what Mr. Fincham has said about, yes, if all the stars line up correctly and what have you, that he could probably build this 5-bedroom home and have people coming in and staying. I think the one, he'd have a problem getting a septic permit to put in a 5 or 6-bedroom house, and I just don't know that that's something that he could set up very easily. So again, having said that, that's my feelings. Other comments, thoughts?
Why don't you let Mr. Wilson, is he still here? He's gone.
Yeah, Wilson, Mr. Wilson's here.
Mr. Wilson, convince us to why we should do this.
Yes, sir. I think Mr. Akers makes some very good points. This is different, it's new, it's not something that's been done in the county before. These are all concerns. What happens if it does turn into something that we don't want it to? Obviously, we don't want to see something like that happen. Mr. Fincham tells me that this is a special exception and the board can change that immediately should that occur, and you can eliminate their ability to operate that facility like that. Then you have a taxable entity that unfortunately they can't use for that particular purpose any longer. So you're still receiving revenue even though they can't continue to have whatever activity that you didn't want to occur. So that gives you some protection, and if it were to happen, let's say VSE or some other company like that, not ideal perhaps examples, because I think they're exemplary firms that we have in Ladysmith, and if they were to carry out this kind of activity, they would be exceptional and very positive as well. I think what we have, in fact, is a very new situation. We have a company in Caroline County that's doing something exciting. They're selling their product internationally. Caroline County is plugged into the flat earth international market, and they're doing business in a way that people overseas expect to see done. We don't have the facilities within the county commercially that can make this happen. That's why they want to do it. Now, if we had an embassy suites down the road that they could easily access to have that kind of hosting and drinks and dinner and so forth, and a suite and a conference room and so forth right there, that would make some sense. And we could say, why do you need to do this? Because we have an embassy suites per chance here. Since that is not the case, this step makes a certain degree of sense. We also have a couple basic positives with this. They're going to build something you can tax. We need revenue. This is a good thing. Let's tax their investment. Their investment also is one that could add more business and is likely to add more business, and they're already talking about a 50,000 square foot expansion. That's something we can tax for revenue as well. Certainly, I think Caroline County is happily lower in unemployment than many other communities, and certainly the national average, but it's still too high. This will create more jobs. That's a good thing. I think all these things stack up, and I hope in favor of their investment and the board feeling more comfortable about this. But I think ultimately, Mr. Akers, I think your point is extremely well taken. If it's not what we want it to be, what do we do about it? We should have some recourse, and I believe the board will have that recourse to be able to pull the plug so they can't do it any longer, but you can still tax them for it.
Just make sure I understand what you're saying, Mr. Wilson. So you're telling me that building this guest house is going to create jobs?
It will help do that. If someone comes in from Honduras, for example, and they spend 3 days going over their particular plans of the items they wanted instead of trying to fax back and forth and not having the good communication, but they developed a relationship, the plans for the new product that is developed, that's more business for this company.
You're saying they cannot conduct these businesses in the hotels and motels around in the county and neighboring counties, is what you're telling me?
I'm saying that it is better.
No, is that what you're telling me? That they cannot conduct that same business in those hotels and motels around? They must have the guest house in order to conduct these business meetings?
They would feel that they can get more of the kind of positive reinforcement and the sales environment that they want through this guest house concept, and that
is your idea, that is your thought. I don't know that. Have you talked to the people from Honduras, the fact that they will not buy from this company if they don't have this guest house?
No, sir, I'm not confirming the universal negatives on that.
It's an assumption on your part. I got you, I understand. All right, other questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. Okay, Gary, since you're standing there, well, okay, it doesn't work out. It ends up being something that we consider to be outside the scope of what we've given them a special exception. And we take it. Now they have this 6,000 to 7,000 square foot house on their property.
Yes, sir.
We can't keep them out of it. Can we, Mr. Fincham, Mr. Whiteman, can we lock them out of their facility, lock them out of their building?
Mr. Seeley, I think the issue then becomes whether you revoke, number one, giving them notice that they're in violation of their use permit, and if they do not come into compliance, then to revoke that use permit.
What will that mean? I mean, it's a house, it's a structure, it's there, water, sewer, electricity.
It is a use that is allowed as a special exception under the ordinance. It's not a by right use or a permitted use. It is a special use that requires board approval. And if they are not complying with the conditions that you imposed upon them, then there are two options. Number one, as I said, obtain compliance with those conditions, or secondly, revoke the use of that, or revoke that specific use that they had to come to you for approval in the first place, which the board has done.
Are you going to live there then and make sure that they don't, I mean, we then become the enforcer and it becomes incumbent upon us to make sure that they, A, come into compliance, and B, they're in the right use. And I'm in the vein with Mr. Thomas. They could build a house in an RP area, very close to there, facilitate the same thing, not being in the industrial property, and have the same thing. We wouldn't have the issues of, and we may have other issues, but at least it would be a residential property. We know what that has to conform to. We know what that needs. We know what needs to be done and what can and can't be done there. Excuse me. So what I'm looking at is, here it is on a property. We say, no, you know, you violated, you're done, we pull your SE. Then what? They've got a 6,000 square foot house that we then are in a constant battle over, and I don't see that as the best use of the resources for the county.
I'm not sure those issues go away if a single-family dwelling is constructed in the RP district. I think in accordance with the provisions of the ordinance on occupancy, I think some of those enforcement issues are still going to be there from a staff perspective. So I'm not sure that issue in and of itself goes away. It may still be there.
But it does go away as far as other M1 property is concerned.
Yes, sir, I agree with you there. In terms of establishing that use, that
Right.
issue goes away. That's correct.
Okay.
But he's got a couple of unique factors that he proposes, like this has to be your U.S. headquarters or whatever. So it does kind of make it a little more restrictive. You know, that would eliminate other people from saying, oh, because they did it, we want to do it. But if theirs isn't the U.S. headquarters, which is what he has in the ordinance,
Or Virginia.
then they wouldn't apply. So, although I heard Mr. Wilson's discussion during our break, and it's not quite a argument I would totally agree with, but there is the just in case it has merit. Just in case we're going to get more people in that'll do more business there. They'll have more revenue, we'll have more tax revenue. Just in case that happens, they could expand. Can I tie this to their expansion?
Well, it's a text amendment for the entire county.
Right.
And so I don't know how you tie it to their expansion when you're not going to do it anywhere else.
Well, I think you could look at it in the context in terms of your standards.
Right.
Of a minimum square footage standard or a minimum size standard for the operation itself.
Yeah.
Large operation or investment, I think we could look at something like that.
See, I really don't necessarily want to do this. But then again, as we said outside, I tend to flirt around the edge of the rules. And if they flirted around the edge of the rules, they could build a house and say, hey, I built a house. Have a nice day, tax me on it. I'm gonna use it as rental property. We never inspect it. We never have a chance to revoke it. They could literally do whatever they wanted to do until Scott showed up, or, you know, a deputy showed up. At least this way you had 2 or 3 guests per, I think guests per 3 nights is whatever it was, 3 or 4 nights, you know, maximum. We inspected in 6 weeks. It's a kind of just in case. I'm not necessarily saying right now it's a good idea, but if they had an alternative that would give me no control over their alternative, I might take what wasn't a good idea instead of no control. Plus, if it doesn't, I'm not sure, Kevin said no, but I'm pretty sure if the county revokes their special exception and says their guest quarters is closed for whatever reason, some sort of way, I'm sure, and some sort of way we'd, you know, put a lock on it. I'm sure foreclosure processes basically lock you out of your house. So we ought to be able to do something there.
Right. I mean, if there were an enforcement action and then they stayed in violation, you could go and get a court order, you know, that they be enjoined from, you know, entering the property. Yeah. I mean, might take a little bit more, but ultimately there would be a way to, you know, completely keep them off the property if it came to that.
But at some point, would a judge say to them, suppose they come back and said, okay, we're not going to have it as a guest quarter anymore, we're going to have it now as a house. The judge would still not allow them to come back into their house that they're paying taxes on, that they built?
Well, I think it would be very fact specific. I mean, as to, you know, what they were doing. I mean, as far as if you're revoking the SE,
yeah,
you know, then the court could go in and say you can't do that. I mean, if it's, right. I think it's like what Mike is saying. If it's a single family dwelling, you know, and they're permitted within the occupancy limits, you know, to have people in there.
Well, what they explained to us the last time he was here is basically going to be a house. I mean, it's not going to be a hotel that's 3 stories high or a motel that's 3 stories high. It's going to be a house.
He's got plans in it. Yeah.
So I'm still not understanding that if he comes back and says, okay, you take your special exception and do what you want to with it, I don't want it anymore as far as a guest house. I want to have a house where I can live in. Are you saying the judge would not allow him to do that either?
No, I mean, if it were a house versus a revoked SE, I mean, I think as long as they were within the, you know, the parameters of the occupancy limits. I mean, I don't think we define residents. You know, I don't think we make people who own property stay in there for any amount of time. I mean, I think as long as they're not renting it out, I mean, or using it for transient lodging or as a boarding house, you know, that you could define it that way. If it's just somebody that has a private residence that's, you know, allowing people to come and stay for free, you know, yeah, it may be that there wouldn't be anything a court could do.
That's what I'm saying.
See, we don't necessarily know. I mean, I think that's a good point, Ann, but we don't necessarily know if we made this a special exception and they didn't comply with the special exception, we pulled it. We don't necessarily, we know, based on what you've said, that a judge would pretty much say, okay, you can board the house up or whatever and they can't use it because it was guest quarters, they violated the special exception. We know we're safe there. What we really don't know is after the judge gave them the court order and said you're going to board it up, if the applicant came back and said to the county, then my bad, I'm going to make it a house instead. But then we as the county would have some, I'm sure, input in that because it would have to be some sort of rezoning or another text amendment. There's more process to it, right?
In the B1 and M1 districts, single-family dwellings are not permitted as a use in those districts.
By right.
By right, or by special exception. Now, you can have a caretaker's dwelling as an accessory use by special exception.
Which we did right down the street. For the nursery people, we gave them a caretaker dwelling.
Yes.
Yeah.
But residential occupancy is limited by specific uses in those districts. It's not for example, you could not take 10 acres of B1 zoning, subdivide it into 10 lots and put single-family dwellings on them. So in terms of reversion or conversion to single-family dwellings, yes, there are ordinance provisions that may come into play there.
So that's the protection. If we do a guest quarters, they fail, you know, because of course if they do things right, we really don't care. But if they fail, we pull back their SE, go to court if we have to, board the house up, then they have to come back and apply for a rezoning to use it as a house, which then the board would have that ability to say yay or nay to. So you have judicial protection, and then you have the board's protection again if something were to go awry.
And my thinking is we have the protection to begin with and not approve it. How about the, how many special exceptions have we revoked?
I know
In
of
the last-
one.
I was going to say, I know of one.
One in recent years, and perhaps one pending that has not yet come to the board.
When you say recent years, I've been on this board for 22 years, and I can only remember one. We came close to another one up in Cedar, but
Yeah,
that never took place.
there were a couple that got close though.
Yeah, but that
There were a
one,
couple that got close. I do remember that. And whatever the situation was, they rectified it before we pulled their SE.
but I can only remember one.
I think you're right. I think there's only been, at least my knowledge, there's only been one where the board actually ultimately revoked the permit.
So our track record is not very good. Okay. All right. Any other board members have comments?
Yeah, I have a question
Go
for,
ahead, Mr. Clark, please.
there's not a site plan in here. How far away from the actual wood facility is this particular dwelling going to be?
How far would it need to be, or?
What have they actually put in a preliminary site plan to you?
I believe we have a concept plan, Mr. Popowitz, and there would be a couple of issues there. One, if it's all zoned M1, then your setbacks are exterior to the property line. Internally, it would be subject to any separation requirements for the different types of uses.
Okay.
If it's a separate parcel or separate zoning, then you also have internal separations to that zoning district boundary.
Okay. All right. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is that how easy would it be to down zone this if we were to get into a situation where we needed to remove the facility, or if the facility actually goes away, the whole entire facility goes away?
I think downzoning is probably a different issue in terms of versus a special use permit.
Yes.
By our ordinance, if a special use permit is not used for consecutively for a 12-month period of time, then by ordinance, that special use permit becomes null and void.
Yes.
So in theory, if the whole facility closed down and this particular use was discontinued for a 12-month period, then that special use permit would be void at the end of that 12-month period. So if I understand the question correctly, if the use goes away, if the industrial use goes away, this is a special use permit in addition to, or which is tied to the principal use, which is a manufacturing facility.
Exactly.
If the manufacturing facility goes away, the SE then is no longer accessory to a principal use.
Yes. And that's kind of where I think we're falling short on on the text amendment here. I'd like to see us try to address that because this is a special, really a special type of thing. And if we were to allow this, I think that we need to at least look at what we're going to do with that building in that case, if that facility were to, the primary use goes away.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I believe we've held a public hearing, but I can detect we're probably not going to come to consensus now. But I asked staff if he would look at the modifications Mr. Papa was asked. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just, you know, comment in general, you know, even if the one addition where it says, you know, you add a standard for it to be the headquarters of Virginia, United States operation, and if it also says something like they would have a annual income of $100 million, it would make me think about it. But to set a precedence for when I don't know what I'm getting, I don't have much incentive to move in this direction. But, you know, I agree with Mr. Thomas, but, you know, unless a whole lot changes, I hate to see us spend a whole lot more resources and time and lawyer fees to try to make this thing work out, because I still don't see nothing that's going to convince me yet. So that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Ready?
Well, I mean, we're ready for a vote, or you want to, I mean, I don't, you know, the comments, I don't know how it would turn out, the vote would turn out, but I think certainly everybody, there are several members on this board that has issues that a lot more has to be presented than what you presented at this point that convince us to change, and I think you've probably run out of ideas and suggestions, and Mr. Wilson, I have the greatest respect for you, but I'm not sure that, you know, we have to vote on what might be. I'm not sure I'm willing to risk the future of Caroline County on what might happen and what might come to pass, what have you. So I don't know.
Mr. Chairman, that's kind of our job. We do that all the time, but in this case,
no, we don't do that all the time.
In this case, I'll say that we'll give staff one more time to incorporate the suggestions of Mr. Popowitz and Mr. Rozelle, and see if they come back with something that is appealing to the board, and if not, then this issue would be dead.
All right, my question to you is, Mr. Rozelle mentioned $100 million. I don't believe this company generates $100 million in sales a year, or does it?
Mr. Akers, the company has not shared that confidence with me.
Okay. Well, they'll have to do that in order to get anywhere to move forward, I think.
Well, there may be a number that Mr. Rozelle might be satisfied with, 75 or...
I think Mr. Rozelle was quite clear in what his number was. I don't think he didn't stutter, he didn't hesitate in saying those numbers, I can tell you. I heard him quite plainly. All right, the next board meeting, we're going to vote on this issue once and for all, so do what you got to do, Mr. Fincham, to bring something back to this board, but I trust this board will eliminate this issue from its agenda at the next board meeting, one way or the other. Okay? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just one question, if I may.
One question?
One question, it's clarification for me when I talk to the firm. When we talk about $100 million, is that what their current earnings are now, or what their projected earnings are?
No, what their current. I mean, he can tell you what his projection is going to be, and he could be off by, you know, several million dollars.
I thought perhaps that would be a
no,
goal they would shoot for.
We're talking about today's dollar.
I see. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Wilson.
you.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is unfinished business. Mr. Fincham, I believe you're going to be back up. Review of chapters 5 and 6 of draft of 2030 comprehensive plan.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question for clarification?
Go ahead, Mr. Fincham.
I'm not clear as to whether the board held the public hearing on the previous agenda item or whether you closed the public hearing on that item. I know we had the discussion. I'm not sure we actually had a public.
Did I close the public? I closed the public
Okay,
hearing and then
okay,
we
I
had
just-
discussion on it.
Okay.
I'm sorry?
Okay.
That's right.
I
That's
just,
what I was
for clarification, thank you, sir.
No problem.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the next item on your agenda is the review of draft chapters 5 and 6 of the draft 2030 comprehensive plan. The board previously has had several presentations generally on the overview of the update as well as the first 4 chapters. Tonight I'm here to give you a brief overview of the cultural and historic resources chapter, which is chapter 5, and the economic development chapter, which is chapter 6. Cultural and historical resources has been a chapter in the comprehensive plan since the 1994 plan was adopted. The major addition to this chapter is really a discussion or an overview of the county's history from the prehistoric times to where we are today. Some of the items of interest include a reference under the prehistoric discussion of the prehistoric times of some of the fossil finds at the Carmel Church Quarry, as evidenced by the model that is displayed down at the county's visitor center. We also have I think a good but brief discussion about pre-colonial times and our Native American residents that occupied this territory before it actually became a county, and a discussion about the historical uses of property, the reliance on the river for navigation, et cetera, et cetera. It then progresses to a discussion of the colonial period up to today. We discuss Stonewall Jackson and his impacts on county history. We discussed the Bowling Green fires. We've had 2 fires in the town of Bowling Green, and we discussed those and their importance to the county. We also talk about the history of transportation in Caroline County and how that has actually shaped the county and where we are today. We talk, as I said earlier, about the initial reliance on river transportation, the early colonial road system in the county, the transition to reliance and importance of railroads on the county's development, and back to the development of highways and roads based upon the primary roads in the interstate road system. We also talk about some of the historically important figures in Caroline County. We talk about Edmund Pendleton, George Rogers Clark, and several others about their importance to our country's founding and their impacts to Caroline County. One of the things we try to do is to identify all the historically important cemeteries in the county, something that was not included in previous plans. And finally, we also have a discussion of all the towns and villages, generally how they came into being, reliance on transportation, trade, what led to the developments of the different villages and towns that we have in the county. A carryover from the previous plan is a discussion of the preservation efforts in the county, and most of which have been driven by individual citizens and their desire to identify and protect historically significant structures in the county. We've updated the National and Virginia Register of Historic Places. A number of additions to those 2 registers have been made since the last plan, and we update the plan to include those new designations. We also identified the sites of potential historic importance, and thanks to economic development, there's a nice map that identifies all the historically important places and structures in Caroline County. And that map is included in Chapter 5. So that briefly summarizes the changes to Chapter 5, with the most significant change, I think, being the discussion of the county's history. It's not a detailed discussion by any stretch of the imagination and doesn't touch every item of historical or cultural importance to the county, but I think it's a good place that readers of the plan can go to get an overview of Caroline County from, as I said, the prehistoric times to where we are today. Chapter 6 is a new chapter to the plan. Economic development is an area that has always been important to the board, and I think has perhaps had more of an emphasis placed on it, in part or perhaps based upon the current economic conditions. It's visible and to the forefront of our planning efforts. Because of the importance of economic development to the county, we felt that it was in need of its own chapter. And as I stated early in the process, we've actually included this as one of the new chapters in the plan. One of the things that we talk about are economic indicators, which is a measure of the relative health of Caroline County. We look at things like employment, median household income, wages, and taxes. One area that we thought was important would be to identify the 30 largest businesses by tax revenue in the county. That's something that we've included in the plan. That is public information that's made available by the Commonwealth of Virginia, so it's not privileged information that we're sharing that perhaps should not be out there, but it's information that's made public by the Commonwealth. We thought that it would be good for readers of the plan to see who the largest businesses are in the county. We also talk about our current economic development program, business investment from 2000 to 2007. There was a large amount of business investment in Caroline County. I don't think the average person realizes how much investment in terms of dollar value has been made in Caroline County. We felt it was important to highlight that. We also discussed the Economic Development Department and their responsibilities. And finally, recent successful recruitments in Caroline County. We think it's always a good idea for the public to see what the board has done in terms of economic development, and we've identified that in this chapter. We also do an assessment of the community strengths and weaknesses. Compared to other localities, in some areas we lag behind, and we identify some of those weaknesses, but we also identify some of the strengths that we have. One of the things that we tout is rail access, large parcels of land for recruiting larger industries that need need interstate access. So we try to balance the strengths or the weaknesses of the county with some of the strengths that the county has to offer to offset those weaknesses. We also discuss the recruitment and development strategies for economic development. As I mentioned earlier, we try to match strengths with weaknesses in our economic development effort. One of the recommendations is to focus on larger industries, as I said, that need a lot of land, industries that are well financed. A lot of times you get requests for development from what might be deemed marginal industries that don't have the capital necessary to actually make their project come to fruition. One of the things that we've targeted over the years are well-capitalized industries and firms that have the financial wherewithal to develop a site without the need for significant county investment. We also talk about the TOD project as an economic incentive. Rail in the future is going to be a increasingly important component both to the county's transportation system as well as our economic development efforts. And we also discuss that as one of our strategies. And finally, we talk about the tourism program. A dedicated tourism program is relatively new to Caroline County, but we identified the potential opportunities that are out there, such as the State Fair of Virginia and other tourism-related industries and businesses that might be appropriate to encourage to locate in Caroline County. We talk about the visitor center and the potential impacts and benefits of that facility at Carmel Church. And finally, we talk about, in a little more detail, potential tourism strategies that we might look at in the future as a guide to developing our tourism program. That's a brief overview of the 2 chapters, and with that, I'll answer any questions that the board might have.
Board have any questions, Mr. Fincham? On page 6-4, the business tax revenue generators, that includes what? This tax revenue that's shown here, that includes what?
Those are real estate taxes, personal property taxes. I do not believe that includes business license taxes. I think it's really residential and personal property, machineries and tools, etc.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fincham. Appreciate it. New business, approval of agreement with MetroCast Communications.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to lead into the subject matter, and the county attorney is here, who's been heavily engaged in the involvement with MetroCast in the drafting of the agreement that is before you this evening. As you know, Caroline County has been without a franchise agreement with both MetroCast and Comcast for a number of years now, not months. It's been a number of years, and when MetroCast took over a few years ago, they were very, very interested in trying to resolve the long-standing relationship with the county that the TV cable company has always had. And over the last several months, we've made great strides in coming together to reach the tentative agreement that's before you today. And as you know, you met with representatives of MetroCast a couple meetings ago and had a chance to discuss some issues in closed session. So I would ask the board to look at this agreement. Certainly ask the county attorney any questions or have any comments that you might have. And once the agreement is ratified, whether it be tonight or at a future meeting, then we would have a public hearing on an ordinance that would establish and codify the agreement and set forth the terms of the franchise arrangement that would be made with MetroCast. And I would also say that we're still negotiating with Comcast to the best of our ability. It's not always been easy and successful, but we are negotiating with them.
Questions of the county attorney? As the board wishes, move on this issue.
Do you need a motion to go to public hearing?
The county attorney has something she'd like to say.
If I may, there were two, the comments that, there are 2 comments in this agreement that didn't show up that are in your packet that I think I just want to point out to you for clarification. And one is related to the capital support, and in the agreement we were trying to negotiate for an original capital grant of that MetroCast had offered $7,500. We had come back with, we prefer the county get $10,000 plus $300 a month towards recording the meetings, which is, the $300 a month is similar to what the town of Bowling Green is getting. Their response was they would do one or the other, the 10,000, you know, or the 300 a month. And so the county administrator and I thought that was reasonable, the $10,000, but, you know, that's one of the, that's one of the comments, that in this agreement, it has both provisions, but just so you know that that's what they had offered, the 10,000 a month, which again is in the town at 7,500. And there's,
10,000 a month or a year?
I'm sorry, 10,000 a one time. Yes. So that is in there, just that one change, just so you know. And then I also just wanted to explain the access channel. We had requested 2 channels, which is also what Bowling Green has in their agreement. And Metrocast told me that what the town has is their access channel for the town, and then they've got one reserved for as an educational channel. And they would be willing to then give the county one access channel, but they would all be available on the system. So in essence, the county would really be getting, and since it's tied into the same system, there would be 3 access channels that county residents would get. They could see the town channel, the county channel, and then the shared education channel. So while the agreement says 1, and you'll see in there that, you know, we tried to get 2, struck that back to 1, and that's why, because the explanation was we're going to get, in essence, 3. So just so you're clear on those, you know, and are okay with those changes, then, you know, the ordinances or the agreement, you know, it's all here.
Okay.
And then one thing we couldn't in the agreement kind of enforce their cable modem expansion.
That's right.
Then that was something we talked about before.
Correct.
So they've said they plan to do it, but we can't necessarily enforce it on this agreement.
Right.
But I think the 300 a month is probably more beneficial, at least that's ongoing, the 10,000 one time. I see it as a way of facilitating getting the meetings taped and those kinds of things, so I'd rather see the 300 a month than the one-time 10,000.
This agreement is for,
15 years.
yeah.
I laugh because it'll probably only take us 15 more to get a renewal done. This one took 6.
I'm in agreement with Mr. Seeley that probably the 300 a month is better than one time 10, because over a 15-year period, that's,
Well, their response to me, Mr. Ashcraft is asking about what they would provide about cash, and their response was Metrocast would be willing to either A, increase the capital contribution to 10,000, or B, provide 300 a month for recording board meetings, but not both. So.
and 300 a month is ongoing. They did not
Correct.
put a limit.
Which is $3,600 a year, so in less than 3 years, we get 10,000 back.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, they would be fine, so I can change that one provision.
Okay, 300 a month.
Can we get 10,000 a month for 15 years?
That'd be nice.
Okay.
Well, as long as it didn't mean 10,000 a year.
Yeah, that's
They
the
didn't
thing. I
mean
mean,
that.
the one time, if they were talking about 10,000 a year, that's a different story.
No.
At one time.
We've been working on this for years. So, you know, and our attorneys have been over it, and you guys are happy with where we are now?
Yes. We worked very hard on this beginning, several years ago, and then state law changed. The state has come in, and there are provisions that, you know, are slightly different. If Metrocast decided, you know, they didn't want to continue with these this negotiated agreement and go the model route, and, you know, perhaps, you know, there would be differences. There are some recurring fees that may be available based on what their gross revenues are, but for the county, you know, that's not really applicable because they're so low right now. And so when we weighed what those potential fees might be versus this agreement that has substantially greater customer service standards, reporting standards, records requirements, so that there is greater oversight by the county, or an ability to have that type of information, and penalties and ways to address any problems that do arise. Those were substantially greater in this agreement than in the state statute. So based on our understanding of what the county's and the board's concerns have been with prior service, it really made sense, we thought.
As the board wish to move forward. Is there a motion to approve the agreement?
Motion to approve the agreement, Mr. Chairman.
With
Second.
the
With
correction
the
as
correction.
far as $300 a month rather than
With the
$10,000.
$300 a month provision.
Second?
Second.
Motion by Mr. Thomas, seconded by Mr. Seeley. Discussion on the motion. All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The motion is carried. Informational calendar items?
Mr. Chairman, excuse me, could I have a motion to authorize a public hearing for October 13th on the ordinance? Or do you feel like you need a first reading of the ordinance?
Well, the agreement actually isn't adopted as an ordinance. The county has currently the cable ordinance, which may need to be modified to reflect the agreement. Right now, the ordinance that we have was drafted with the old franchise agreement that has been superseded by state law. So there are a lot of provisions that are no longer necessary in the ordinance, but this actual agreement doesn't have to be adopted as an ordinance. It's just a regular agreement. No, sir.
Okay, good, I'm sorry. I thought that's what we were negotiating, so I apologize.
We're done.
Okay, informational calendar items, Mr. Ashcraft?
Mr. Chairman, as you know, the board and the school board, as you've already announced, have their joint meeting on September the 17th, and that is scheduled for 7 p.m. here in the auditorium. I would remind the members of the board that before that takes place in another venue, there is a community meeting involving citizens from Dawn. Well, I guess it can be citizens from Caroline County, but the topic is to involve the communities of Dawn and Bowling Green and the issues facing young people and how the school system is stepping in to facilitate those discussions with community leaders. That begins at 5:30, from my understanding, with a dinner, and then the actual dialogue begins at 6:30. So I just throw that out there to let everybody know that there could be some overlap in those two meetings.
And that's at the high school.
That's correct. So that is taking place. The day before, they are having a public forum. I guess this relates back to the discussion that we had at the last meeting regarding the feasibility study. And they are having a public meeting to receive community input on their capital improvements plan. That is on the 16th. I believe that's also at 7 o'clock. I sent a notice out to all the board members on that. We've heard about the state fair, ribbon cutting at 9 a.m. On September the 24th. All board members are invited to attend that event, and you've also been invited to another event the night before that kind of kicks off the fair for any of the members who would want to attend. That is actually a fundraiser for their scholarship program. And then I would also, Mr. Chairman, alert you to October is always a busy month for fairs and festivals, with the Harvest Festival being in October, the Frog Level Festival also being in October. So that concludes the calendar items for this evening. And we also have the capital plan that's in front of you as information as well.
Okay. Closing board comments. Mr. Poplitz.
I have none.
Mr. Thomas.
I have none.
Mr. Seeley.
No, sir.
Mr. Rozell.
The only one I have, Mr. Chairman, is just, earlier this evening, we approved the assistance for the Carolina Pines wastewater revenue projection study, and certainly appreciate the board's support on that. But it was stated earlier that money was new money to be added with more money that we're adding, but that money was already in our budget. So just want to clarify for the rest of the board members that that was already budgeted.
That was part of the match and study that they gave us money to do, remember that?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rozell. I have no closing comments. Is there...
Mr. Chairman, I move that we convene to close meeting pursuant to personnel exception 2.2-3711A1 Code of Virginia to discuss job duties of certain county personnel. And 2, the consultation with legal counsel and briefing by staff, section 2.2-3711A7 of Code of Virginia to discuss action or litigation pending against the county. Heflin versus Caroline County, the potential litigation related to tree trimming on property to adjacent county lands, and issues required of legal advice, specifically the non-mandatory advisory committees.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Motion by Mr. Rozell, seconded by Mr. Poplitz.
Could you read it again? I wasn't sure I heard.
Discussion of the motion. All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The motion is carried, and the board will enter